missing Rich and Marcus. And if I could, we don't have anyone, I gotta take these off, sorry. We don't have anyone participating remotely. So if I could get a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Adoption of the previous minutes. Anyone have any questions, comments, changes? All right, if I could get a motion to adopt the previous minutes as presented. All in favor? All right, so moved. We don't have anyone in the audience, so no public comment tonight. And I don't believe we have any presentations, so we'll be starting with unfinished business, discussion and recommendation of text amendments to the Marvin Development Ordinance.
Okay. All right, so this is kind of building off the previous meeting discussions. Mainly tonight, just we're going to be going through the changes for tree regulations, specifically to get these adopted in December so we can then apply for our Tree City USA accreditation. At our last meeting, we kind of went through high level of the direction staff was kind of going. I have now drafted the changes to at least Chapter 93. I do have draft changes to Article 11. I'm going to kind of hit on those differences real quick for you in a sec. But tonight, I definitely, once I go through Chapter 93, would like the board to make a recommendation for the amendments to that. Regarding the amendments to Article 11 of the NDO, we can table that because that's more, like I said, the difference is Chapter 93 is now becoming our tree ordinance. So it has all of our public tree regulations, and I did include a subsection in there on still tree removal permits on private property, and I'll kind of talk on that when we go through this. And then we moved everything from the old Chapter 93 that was development related to Article 11. And basically, I'm in the process of then just making sure cross-referencing from Article 11 to 93 on public stuff, like it all lines up. But the biggest goal is as long as we have a public tree ordinance that kind of hit the criteria for Tree City USA and address the concerns from the state, our state representative on that, that's my main goal for tonight. Any questions on that? Okay. I'm going to go through, so this is a little bit updated, what's on the screen from what's in the packets. I went through and kind of cleaned up that and kind of made it more consistent for Chapter 93 and added a few subsections. So that's wrong. But in short, once again, this is kind of hitting the background to meet our Tree City USA accreditation. Really, so Chapter 93 is existing in our Code of Ordinances. It's been our tree ordinance since, I think, 2008, 5, maybe, 4, somewhere. So what the first change is basically going to repeal that existing language and replace it with this new language. This new language is still taking some of the existing, but it's a whole lot easier, I think, to repeal that whole section and reorganize it with the newly proposed language. So getting into it, the authority and enactment, it's pretty much the same language. What I have highlighted is certain kind of areas that I'm waiting to get maybe some feedback from Keith or our state contact there just to address / clean up. Article or 9302 is the same. 9303 is a little bit different, but this is basically stating that this chapter establishes the standards for planting, maintenance, and removal of trees on public property and regulates certain tree removal on private property at all times. At the last meeting, I kind of discussed that regulating individual tree removals on individually owned property is kind of a gray area. I went ahead and just put language in there that we're going to do it. And I looked at like some other ordinances, Davidson. I basically looked at Davidson's, and they kind of had a very kind of clear here, and so I'll hit on that. I think it's 9307. But the goal is still, once again, meeting the Tree City USA criteria by having the public tree regulations that include the maintenance responsibility, the standards that is set forth, and then also establishing the PRNG as the tree advisory board.
Can I ask just a quick general question? Especially with tree topping, reading that definition. So for power companies coming in and trimming trees back away from power lines, how does this, do they have to,
Comply?
Yeah, do they have to comply with these ordinances? Because they
The way
they do
this is
some
written,
shearing.
yes. Now, that's if the trees are in the right of way. Like, if they're on an easement, if it's an easement that runs on private property or an easement that runs on the back side of the right of way, but it's not actually in the public right of way, this can still somewhat apply, but the goal of the public tree ordinances, and we do have a section regarding utility companies and that, is for anything that's on public property owned by the village hall, the park, pocket park, all of the above, and anything within the right of way. So along the road that's actually in the right of way and not on private property. So I've got a section in here on that, and I'll see how that reads. But the short end is yes, like I have specific language in there regarding tree topping, regarding utility companies, and I'm pretty sure it says that they need to obviously follow the provisions herein, but also coordinate with the village. And so it's pretty much probably going to be one of these things that once it happens, I'll have to go out and talk with whoever the project coordinator is if they're doing it, and halt it, get it, make sure that they're aware of what our ordinance states, and go from there. I may also just, once it's adopted, send it to tree or Union Power, and hopefully that may also get ahead of any future maintenance along their utility lines for trees.
Okay, thank you.
So this new 9304 is the definitions. It's pretty much trying to align the consistent with any definitions that are applicable in Article 11. Public tree, private tree, heritage and specimen tree, tree topping, the tree conservation area. Once again, pretty straightforward here. I did make a note here that we may want to define some of these other things. I'm kind of going to want to see if, once again, if that's what's recommended by Keith and mainly by Keith, and I'll add them, but they're pretty straightforward. They can also be kind of just an administrative guideline type thing, and we can make like a tree planting and maintenance type handout and have some of those defined there. And this is where the changes really start to occur. So this 9305 establishes a tree advisory board, which basically is the Parks and Recreation Greenway Board. I'll have to get with Austin to say if we want to, I don't want to have to establish different boards. So we'll have to go amend, I think it's chapter 30, so whatever the PRNG's like actual duties and responsibilities are, and just add that they will act or, serve as the tree advisory board in the same capacity.
Could you just rephrase the language, say that the responsibilities of
The PRNG,
these responsibilities would be conferred upon the PRG board,
yeah.
acting in that capacity? I think you might be able to get around amending that
Okay.
ordinance.
Well, Christina wants me to do it anyway.
All right, we'll do it that way.
So, but in short, it's just adding these. They're already doing a lot of these, and that's part of the reason why, once again, it's just kind of outlining it and making it clear just as what was recommended to us. But in, reviewing the Arbor Day activities, do a 5-year plan to plant, maintain trees on, it needs to be village property, which I've actually already talked with them on this. When we held our Arbor Day event, that is something that we want to continue to do every year, and look at basically building out a planting plan for, what tree, how many trees are we going to plant per year as part of this, our Arbor Day celebration, those recommended species, the location, and that's going to be basically the PRNG's kind of first task at the beginning of the new year. But this is, once again, just kind of their duties and responsibilities. And then it clearly then defines myself to basically enforce the provisions of this chapter, both on public and private property. It also then delegates that the Village Public Works Department is responsible for planting and the maintenance and removal of trees on village property and public right-of-ways. Once again, covering that clear maintenance responsibility that was recommended. In blue here, this is basically just stating that it's unlawful for any person to stop the Public Works Department if they're trying to carry out the duties under this ordinance. The reason I have it highlighted is because I'm not sure if it should go in this section or be like its own little subsection. But the language wouldn't change.
So Hunter,
Mhm.
on This with private property, this is just when we're developing new neighborhoods? No,
No, I'll hit on that here in a sec.
okay.
9306 is just the standards and specifications. It refers to the ANSI A300 standards that, once again, is the recommended standards for, I mean, any type of tree care, tree maintenance. What this is basically stating is that staff or Public Works or any of their, contractors that are carrying out any type of village duties regarding the tree maintenance and care shall be following these standards, as well as the public or the private property on this. 9307 is just the public tree care and protection. So once again, this is everything regarding to public trees on village property and right-of-way. It also kind of states, adjacent property owners' responsibility if it's trees on their property that may prevent hazards to the public. So those would be basically outlining the maintenance and duty responsibility. If you have a tree on your property and it's interfering, overhanging into the right-of-way, it basically is kind of setting that, or even the sidewalk, it's setting those expectations. This would also allow me to cite the property owner if they are not following these regulations. Once again, public tree from damage. Here is the topping that you were asking. So it's basically stating that it's prohibited on any public tree. And it says no village employee or contractor will top the tree except in emergency situations. Utilities are urged to use drop crotch pruning or other crown reduction techniques rather than topping. This is straight from the Tree City USA recommendation language. Once again, it's kind of unclear. They're urged, but what authority do I have? And it is kind of, because they are a public utility for the most part, it's something, once again, that we can try to get ahead of and coordinate with them, but enforcement-wise may be a little gray.
And I don't really know anything about the folks who cut trees back for the power companies, but are they just sawing them off, or are they, are they truly like arborists and they understand where they're cutting, how they're cutting, won't damage the trees? And
That's a good question. I know that we had the utility company like topped a lot of the trees along like Marvin School Road earlier this year, but they look to be still growing back at the top. I'm not.
those are large, I mean, if you think about, those are large investments for Marvin, whether we've actually paid money for them or not. Like, it is part of the look and feel and culture of our community. So, making sure that these people are completely aware of, you kill a tree, like.
Yeah, the only places that you have to really think about is that in most of our subdivisions, and especially where there's street trees or public trees there, the utilities underground. Mainly where this would be occurring is going to be Marvin Road, Joe Carr, Marvin School, and Newtown.
They've been doing it on Marvin Road for
Yeah,
10 years, so they're doing it right because they have to come back and do it.
yeah. So.
That's good then.
Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
Once again, I can discuss with Union Power when they do hire their contractors. I'm sure that they probably have some type of standards that they're following. And those AS&I standards, like there's a lot of companies that state like that they follow, like it's essentially like the professional accreditation for some like arborists and tree care companies. And so that's like their code of ethics to an extent. So most professional companies are going to be following those for the most part as well. This is just once again, some other general language that was just kind of cut and paste. Now I'm going to answer, Angel, your question regarding private property. So 93 is still separating out public and private property versus development. So everything development for a subdivision and all that's still going to be in Article 11. This is just basically going to be regulating individual removal on private property. So if you wanted to remove a tree on your property, you would have to get a tree removal permit and comply with these regulations.
Why would we do that, though?
Well, we already kind of do.
Oh,
We do?
Yes.
I tell you why?
Yeah.
Because individual property owners will come and clear cut their land even though they're not supposed to. And,
Well, like,
instead of
for
asking for permission, they ask for forgiveness.
Well, like,
And
I have a big, huge oak tree in my front yard that's dying. So I have to get a permit to cut it down?
No.
Dying.
If it's dying, you're still exempt. You're good
Okay.
there.
No, these are healthy trees,
Oh.
canopy trees, you know.
Okay,
And if they have to replace them, they replace them wherever they want.
okay.
So it can cause issues.
Yes.
all kinds of things.
Yes,
If it's over a certain number of inches.
Correct.
But 12 inches,
it is.
if it's canopy.
And this is in current Chapter 93. The only difference is the current Chapter 93 has an exemption that says basically if your lot was established prior to the adoption of that ordinance, which was October something 2004, you're exempt.
Let me ask a question on the permit for that. Will we hold the tree companies, are they responsible for coming getting the permit?
Oh, well, I mean,
I mean, that should,
You
where it
would-
should be, because if they don't come and get the permit, they shouldn't be allowed to cut down trees.
you would hold the property owner responsible. That's the only way you can do it. So yes, a tree company can still get a tree removal permit on behalf of the property owner, but if the tree was removed without this permit,
Hire a tree company and they cut it down, there's no permit, they can keep doing it. I mean, you can punish the tree, you can punish the
Property owner.
homeowner, the property owner, but it's a tree company that's doing it.
I will say,
I mean, shouldn't they be responsible because they're coming in and they know if they don't cut down, if they don't get a permit, they're not gonna allow to do business in Marvin.
I will say a majority of residents now, as well as tree care companies, are aware that we do regulate this. Because like I said, we do have regulations in the current, this is kind of mirroring that. It's taking that exemption out because,
But no consequences if they don't.
no, there is consequences for the tree care company. I mean, I don't, once again, in any type of code enforcement, I have to hold the property owner liable. They can then go and hold their tree care company liable, but I can't put language in here that I can hold the contractor liable.
I like where you're going though, because like,
I mean, if he doesn't get a permit, he can't do business.
Well, I will say with the fines and stuff that are part of this, if they don't get a permit, it's once again, they're gonna be held on the property owner, and they then will probably hold their tree care company liable in most of these situations, and they're gonna find out.
Say that, 'cause most people don't know they need a permit.
Like I said, it's
Tree
50/50.
companies, that's their profession. That's what they do for a living. My profession does not have to do anything with cutting down trees in my yard. I would think I'd be allowed to try, it's my property, I can do it. We hold the tree company responsible, that's their profession, they know they have to do it.
So, I mean, a couple of the local companies that do tree removal are aware that they need a removal permit. And so when a property owner reaches out to get a quote, they notify them. But I don't have a list of every single company in the Charlotte metro area that does this. I know of a few companies, and like I said, for the most part, residents do a good job at reaching out to me and ask if they need a permit, even if it's dead. In the current language still says if it's dead, you don't need a permit. And what I always tell them, and it's written in this language now, it says, you don't need a permit, but please verify with the village and provide that documentation, because if you go and cut it down and your neighbor calls and files a complaint, what proof do you have that it was actually dead?
So here's a conundrum for you. If this is what we're doing, then how does it apply to clear-cutting development?
Like I said, development's still completely different. I'm gonna get there in a minute. It's in all of Article 11.
Okay. But we're not saving trees there?
We do save trees there already in Article 11. There's a specific tree credit area, and even under the old ordinance, you had tree preservation areas, and there's a mitigation. That's what I was kind of talking about at the last meeting. Like, if you have a development, there's nothing that we can say that you can't cut down a tree. It says that you have to plant back trees that you cut down, and you have to have a certain portion of your property dedicated for preserving the existing trees on the site, but you can't say we can't cut down a tree. The only ones that you say that you can't cut down are those heritage or specimen trees defined by the ordinance.
So is there a way to make clear-cutting not allowable?
I mean, we don't allow clear cutting. I mean, if you're talking about a specific subdivision, they still preserved 100 feet around. And that's part of, like, that's the only way to do it, because in development, when it comes to grading and the utilities and certain things of that, there's no possible way to preserve every single tree. And even, we talked to
Right,
Keith
well,
about
You
this.
gotta cut them down to build a house, I get that, but, I mean, when you come in and you just clear cut, even if you have, a buffer around it, it's still ugly, so.
But-
they'll be required though to, besides the fact they preserve, they will, and I'm not, favor of clear cutting.
I know.
But but when you've got a development of that size, in that particular case, they also had some like wetlands and stuff like that that was just swampy, but,
I think Firethorn did it well when Firethorn built because they left everything there and then per lot. So when I bought my lot, it was a forest on it,
Yeah.
you know, so
And
they
it's
didn't
lovely.
come in and they didn't clear
It
out
just-
Firethorn.
but
But
those are custom homes. A lot of what's happening are like.
Tract build.
set,
Happening.
You know,
They're over $1 million, and that's not considered
But-
custom?
no, but they have set facades, like they have set.
Well, it's mass
footprints
grading
and everything.
for the
It's
development.
It's very planned, it's very planned. So, but they will have to replace, once everything is built out, they will have to replace certain trees and replant. So, and not just with, you know, what are the ones that everybody has, those,
Evergreens,
no,
Like
the
crepe
little
myrtle.
ones that, you know. the
Like
shrubs.
ornamental, I mean, yeah, like, what the ordinance states now and what was approved for that specific development basically states that I have a count of every single tree that was removed on that property. And I have a landscape plan that shows how many trees they are planting back per what the ordinance states. And that's the other thing that, you know, some people, yes, you see a wooded lot, and when they provide that tree survey, if there is a heritage or specimen tree that can be saved, that's always recommended. When I'm just completed my first review of the Marvin Commons project, that was one of the few things that I recommended of seeing, especially along the exterior where their land disturbance in that area isn't going to be as detrimental as somewhere like in the middle. However, if with all the trees being removed, there is a calculation, and this was all under the old ordinance, but it still mirrors in this new one, in Article 11, but there's a mitigation chart. If you remove between 12 and 24, you have to plant one tree. If you're between 24 and 36, you have to plant two trees for that one tree. If you're 36 and above, you have to plant three trees for that one tree.
I understand what you're saying, but you're taking down 40, 50, sometimes, you know, older trees than that. So saying that you have to plant a tree when you take down a 50-year-old tree, you know,
They have to be planted back at a certain,
you can't make
growth.
it 50 years old.
No, you can't, but they're also not gonna plant a sapling. They're
Yeah.
not allowed to plant a sapling. They have to, there's a requirement, believe me, I've gotten way too.
And I get, like I said, I get the like aesthetics of it, but ultimately what I'm trying to say is like, we cannot say you can't cut down trees on your property if you're going to develop it. All we can say is that there's a procedure and process that you have to do if you're going to develop it for a subdivision or something else.
But couldn't we tighten the ordinance so that they can't, you know, come in and just, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I get
mean-
why they do it, but that's not necessarily,
So, I mean, I'm not trying to, if you have a certain percentage that's required by the tree credit area, by the ordinance, I can't then say you have to preserve, like, you gotta see what I'm saying? So it's always gonna be what's around the exterior, because with the land development, like I said, especially on that property, the grade was very significant. You can't, you get in the, even if you were to preserve it, most of those trees would have then probably still been damaged during the construction process, because you're scraping the topsoil, and you're threatening the tree at that point.
I agree with what you're saying when you're doing infrastructure and you're bringing in roads and everything. I think what we might be referring to here is the actual lots that homes are being built on. We understand the infrastructure where you have to cut down trees to make rooms for roads and everything like that. But you can, you know, if they are building a neighborhood that has, you know, 50 homes and on 50, you know, you can preserve those 50. You know where those 50
just
homes
costs
are
more.
going before they even do the infrastructure.
yeah, but it costs the developer more to do that, but, I mean,
You're building $1 million homes in this
Yeah.
community.
almost,
know.
yeah.
I said,
Agree.
I get that that you guys have different opinions. I've talked to Keith about this, and we even talked about it with the whole Village Hall Park, and when we were pushing out information on that. And like, what we do is, like I said, there's no possible way to preserve every tree. You got to kind of give and take on when it comes to development.
We're not asking to preserve it.
I know, but like I said, you're also asking, what I'm trying to convey is that you have to have give and take on development. And what we would rather,
Structure.
no, let me,
The take is preserving the lots. That's the give and take.
okay. If you have a property that's this, and you come in and cut a road in,
Yeah.
and then from a grade standpoint, how would you not remove the trees during the mass grading?
That's what my lot was. When I bought
That's
my
how mine
lot was
was.
that. I had a stream. I had two streams in my property. I had a complete forest on it. You know, we preserved as many trees as we can, because it looks good for the home. It looks
I mean,
good
I'm
for
not
the
disagreeing with you, but it's just,
It can be done. It has been done. Now, it's difficult, more expensive, I get that, but, you know, we're not building row homes in this town.
all right, well, like I said, all of this is in Article 11, and we can talk about this after this, and I will do some research. We don't need to make any recommendation on the Article 11 text tonight. This is, like I said, Chapter 93 now has nothing to do with development in general. It's just public trees and private individually owned lots.
I do think it's interesting what Mike said, though, about how do we, at some point, and not hold them accountable. I mean, I think there are ways to hold people accountable, especially if you don't know every tree, company out there. But, in our situation that I was dealing with, the builder knew not to cut the trees down, yet some other company came in and clear cut the lot. Maybe that company, if they had been aware of, the ordinances, maybe they don't get maybe it's like, okay, that's recorded somewhere, and it's like, okay, the next time they come in for a permit, it's like, no, we're denying your permit because you're not following our ordinances. So they lose, it's almost like lose faith, trust kind of thing. It's like that when you're dealing with well diggers, anyone who does that kind of stuff, they will not work on your property and do anything that has not been permitted by counties, because they will lose their license or whatever their credentials are. So, and I know it's not quite the same thing, but
I
just
guess-
in terms of like
Get
that.
the onus off the property owner.
And that's, like I said, and that's kind of why we're trying to separate some of these out, because once again, there's a difference between removing trees for development. Once again, the term development can mean doing an addition, building a pool to a subdivision, to whatever scale. And on our current zoning permit, so if you were to come in saying you were doing a pool, our zoning permit currently has a box that says, are you removing any trees over 12 inches diameter? It says yes, no, and if so, here's the attached tree removal permit. When we go and review those permits and they mark no, we're looking to see where they're proposing it, and if it's wooded, we follow up with them. But most of the time, it's, like I said, they'll attach the applicable tree removal permit and mitigate with either landscape screening for pools or with the proposed canopy trees, what's required by the ordinance. The one-offs are where you do have a property owner that wants to remove trees for their property for the enjoyment of their property, and that's what this is mainly trying to cover. That first part, like I said, when it tied with development, this is still covered by that, but from an individual lot standpoint with tied to development, but those one-offs of like a property owner wanting to remove trees, this is clearly kind of setting out what those requirements and regulations are. Because we've had a few of those.
Have there been any fines, or have you submitted any fines for property owners that cut down trees without permission?
No, because for the most part, like I said,
You just think everybody's getting a permit?
No. He knows.
Okay, but
He knows when they do it. The problem is that he can hold their CO until they plant.
to mitigate, yeah. If they do it if it's not tied to a zoning permit, I don't know if they're cutting down a tree unless their neighbor calls me or somebody calls me saying, hey, my neighbor's cutting down trees, do they have a permit?
Yeah.
But that's kind of the issue, is that the current ordinance
Calls you and say, there are no more trees.
has an exemption, and most of the time that it has occurred is on those older lots and older subdivisions that are larger and technically exempt under the way the current Chapter 93 is written. So,
Are you saying that a lot of people are cutting down their own trees? They're getting the chainsaw and doing it themselves?
no, that's not, no.
No, I mean, that's my point. If they're not doing it themselves, then they're hiring a company that's doing it without permission. And so we're back to there, that if we hold the company responsible, we solve that problem.
Okay, what I was just trying to explain is that what the way that the current ordinance is written, because you asked the question that if, am I fining or holding property owners that are cutting without permits? The ones that have cut down trees without permits are technically exempt under the way the current Chapter 93 reads. Any other situation, like I said, there has not been an instance in my tenure here where somebody has cut down a tree that a neighbor or somebody has called me about that hasn't had a permit.
In my,
They had a permit for your neighbor.
the clear cut?
For your neighbor's property, yes, they had a tree removal permit of what canopy tree, they have got the tree survey of the canopy trees, what was removed and what was planted back.
No, I know that they had a survey, but I didn't think they had a permit to clear cut the lot. That was my understanding, because they did not, that permit was not granted to clear cut it. They had certain ones that were gonna be cut, but then the homeowner told them to cut the whole thing down, all of it down, and that's why you were having to re-loop back around with them, saying that wasn't right, you gotta replant all these trees.
I'll have to go back up on that one. Like I said, I know what you were referring to is that they provided a tree survey for that house. And once again, based off the old ordinance, technically they were probably exempt. Because all of this was still under the old zoning ordinance and what is still currently the old Chapter 93. Because that lot was platted and established prior to the adoption of that ordinance.
Okay, so you're going off the age of the plat, not the age the owners, like not the year the owners purchased it.
Correct. Because that is how Chapter 93 reads right now. Chapter 93, and I'll pull it up.
Oh, that's just crazy.
Well, that's what I'm trying to change in this proposal.
I might be asking the same question a different way, but why not make every tree that has to be cut down in the village of Marvin a permit?
That's what this is doing.
Okay, so then, but if, again, okay, great. Unless they're dead or dying. But still, that's fine, they still have to get a permit, and then they say, you're free to do it because it's a dead tree. But, and then that prevents the owner from saying, hey, just cut down 5 extra trees for me, nobody cares anything. Who's gonna follow up on that, the homeowner that said, just cut down those trees even though I don't have a permit for it?
Like I said, the only way that I know if
I want
trees,
him to cut down a tree in my front yard. He's there. Got a permit for that. Hey, while you're here, I need 4 or 5 trees taken out in the backyard. Can you go ahead and do that for me? He doesn't care. He doesn't need a permit. He's cutting down the one. I mean, that's what I'm trying to prevent, if you understand.
no, I understand where you're coming from. Outside of,
So every tree needs a permit, and then you solve that problem. Then the company knows, sorry, sir, I can't cut down those 4 trees. I have a permit to cut down this 1 tree.
what you're asking me to do, though, is rely on individual,
Companies.
well, no, you're asking me to rely on an individual, just either company, property owners, or whatever, to basically reach out or follow the rules. Yes, we would love that, but obviously we know not everybody does it.
But if you hold the company responsible, he's only allowed to cut down that 1 tree. If he cut down those 4 more, he's gonna either be fined or exempt from doing business again in Marvin.
But the only way that I would have that is if they got the permit in the first place.
They got the permit for the 1 tree, I'm saying.
Okay,
Cut down
so
5.
then what I'm asking is then we'd have to add a section in here that basically states that staff has to go out and do a inspection of the trees removed, which we do on certain developments, or certain properties, but if you came to me for 1 tree removal, I'm probably not gonna come out saying to look at 1 tree, and we can add that stipulation in here.
My point. That's exactly right.
I mean, I'll say this, like, I get where you're coming from, but from a budgetary standpoint and time.
I'm
they don't-
helping him because if that tree company won't do it because they know that they're gonna be fined if they get caught. I'm saying there you shift the onus off of us onto the tree company. They're our check and balance system because if they get caught cutting down more than trees than they have a permit for, they're gonna be fined or they're gonna be exempt from doing
That only
business.
works if we know about it. and
We'll
then
find
it-
out.
And then it's gonna,
But what's the harm?
The state of North Carolina doesn't have business license. So, what are you saying? Are you saying if they're just a startup company,
I start a tree company tomorrow, Mike's Tree Company.
I mean,
I'm not
someone
calling you.
calls a tree company
But I'm
in
gonna cut down trees cheap.
Charlotte to come cut down that 1 tree. do they have to have, in addition to permit, do they have to have a business license?
No.
And so, how you gonna stop them?
Like I said, Mike, I hear what you're,
Just added another layer now.
well, we can't do that.
What people are you gonna hire?
You're- Well,
Hey, Angel?
so we're gonna run away from a problem.
how you follow up, I don't know
How you implement it, yeah.
I don't know how you implement it.
Well, how about this? How about we go with what we've got here, and if we come up with a way to implement it that isn't extraneous on the staff or requires more.
I don't know how that's extraneous if they get, I'm not saying, they might not get caught, but if they do, there's a fine, and there's a penalty, and there's consequences for doing the wrong thing. Here, the consequences, what's the consequences for doing the wrong thing here?
What do you, like, like I said,
If I hire a guy to cut one tree and I wink at him and he cuts 4 more trees down and you find out, what's the consequences?
you would be fined as the property owner. Like I said, everything you're saying, I can do legally to the property owner. I'm not sure if I can do to the, unless they pulled a permit and the tree company was the applicant, that's the only way
That's
that.
what I'm saying, make it every tree be cut down, you have to get a permit for it. And then they have a permit to cut down 1 tree.
It's like I said, I mean, this is what this ordinance is doing. So I said, this is what this ordinance is doing.
I hear you. Cut down 5 trees then.
But I think what he's saying is it's easier to hold the homeowner or the landowner responsible than it is to hold a business responsible or fine a business. Because you have no, like, if you know, besides just saying you can't work in Marvin anymore.
We can't put a lien on their property.
Yeah.
Can't put a, yes, exactly.
Like if
You've
you
got
own
actual-
property and had tenants in it, and your tenants
You can't
had,
fine a company for doing the wrong thing?
We would have to take them to civil court.
Yep,
Okay.
That's a whole
that's expensive.
cost in itself.
Yeah,
But if you're right,
yeah, but we don't have. they
I
don't
mean,
have
if we're
bandwidth.
looking for reasons not to do it, I think we have enough.
I'm just, like I said, we administratively, we can do our best. This really isn't much of an issue right now. All this is really doing is clarifying it. Because, like I said, to my knowledge, unless people have cut down trees and their neighbors haven't called and complained about it, this isn't happening a lot.
Well, I
Honestly,
don't
this
think
isn't
people know that they gotta get a permit to cut
The-
down a tree.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
I promise,
I didn't know it, yeah.
On the planning.
I promise you a majority, because in this kind of builds off the conversations we had last week, like, a bunch of HOAs are aware of what our regulations are, and you sometimes have to get your HOA approval to remove trees, depending on which subdivision you're in. And further than that, like, there are tree companies that do remove trees in the area that are familiar with what our ordinances state. I mean, and they then reach out saying they need a permit, and then I mean, there's been numerous cases of just in different neighborhoods and everything, people have reached out to me saying, hey, most of the time they're dead, I'll be honest, like, but there's a dead tree in my backyard, I would like to have it removed, do I need a permit? And I tell them, technically no, but please provide me the documentation. There's been instances where they'll send me a photo, I'll send it to Keith, the urban forester, and he's like, yeah, that tree's dead. Like, if it's really in question, Keith will come out, like, I'm not gonna have residents have to necessarily, unless you're removing, I think even what the ordinance says is like more than like 10 trees, like, you don't need an official like report from a tree care company or an arborist, because staff can come out and do that inspection for itself. But if you have a greater plan to remove more than that, then that's where you'd need a tree survey or some type of report. And then as well as like if they're not dead, then mitigation plays into that.
Made my point.
Okay.
Where were we?
It's supposed to be a 15-minute meeting. Ken's
And the
looking at
man
me.
of
It's
brevity
your fault.
just stretched it all out.
So once again, I mean, this is cleaning up the old language, basically removing the exemption. I did mention in the previous meeting, like, there is a gray area here because we may need to get that local in legislation to technically still regulate every tree on private property. I did this based off of the conversations that, you know, and feedback from the last meeting. And once again, like I said, this is something that the village has been doing since 2004. It was just that there was this exemption in that 2004 language that made it really, I mean, I've got an email from Keith that was like, "Ooh, this is so confusing, I don't understand it," and that's Keith. And I'm like, Yeah, and I feel like over the years prior to me, like, it's just been interpreted and enforced different ways, regardless if it was written into law or not. And what I'm trying to do is get it written into law and making it clear as possible. And this is on the public side and the individual private side.
My concern is that it might be a bit of an overreach on private property. Now, if somebody's gonna come in and cut down 20 trees, okay, I'm with you. But if they wanna cut down 2 trees that are healthy because they wanna put in a swimming pool or something, or they wanna, I don't know, build a rain garden or something, then, I mean, do we really need to do that?
So, and like I said, what this is mainly trying to achieve is if you have a tree or trees on your property that you want to remove and you don't have some type of plan for a development, like I said, that term development, pool, something to better your property, like
I just want to improve my view.
improve your view, you want more lawn space.
Right.
Like, this is mainly what this is kind of hitting on. Like I said, when it gets tied to a zoning permit, it is a whole lot easier to enforce because that is kind of clearly outlined in the state statutes. And that's where I can tie it, your zoning permit, okay, you want to do a pool and you're removing X amount of trees, here yes, it's clear as day. And that's, like I said, that's where Keith and I really push people, because we have had meetings with residents that say, hey, I want to build a pool, but it's probably going to be 2 years, but we have money now, we want to go ahead and cut down the trees. And I'm like, can we wait? Like, it doesn't, because what if they end up selling, then it's kind of hard, because then they want to always tie their mitigation required to when they're going to do the pool and stuff. And this is trying to really clear that up. Because there is even language that's going to be added to Article 11 that references back to the tree removal permit, but it states, like, unless you have a plan for development or future plans on your property, like, you need to tie it to the zoning development permit in general, if that makes sense. Trees are trust me, I've been looking at this for 4 months now.
I mean, you can also, Angel, you can also look at it as, if we're doing canopy protection, and you can look at Charlotte, like Mecklenburg County as an example, like, they're clear cutting the crap out of stuff, and they're losing their canopy. And so it causes, like, it ups their, there's not as many trees filtering air quality, so the air quality gets worse. You've got higher temperatures on, there's a whole litany of things that happen when you start clearing, when you start losing that canopy. So this is one way for the village to protect the canopy, but, people can still remove trees, you just got to go through the proper channels to do it, so. And there are also very clear standards.
Yeah, like,
Tree has to be.
and yes, like, you can, and if I need to have Keith come to a future meeting, like, I promise you, like, we have had and still have a very robust tree ordinance when it comes to protections during development, and even, like I said, on the individual private property. But there are certain things that we can and can't do based off of what the state statutes say. And however, once again, going back to the like a subdivision example, like, the ultimate goal and intent of what the ordinance is doing is trying to preserve, if not enhance over time, our tree canopy. And so that's why, yes, even though they remove trees to build a subdivision, they have to plant back everything that was removed. And over time, because of what was preserved and what was planted, because there's also a difference in species and quality. That's another thing, is like, some of those times, and especially in a lot of those wooded lots, it may be 500 trees, but only 100 to 120 of them are actually nice quality hardwoods that are in good, healthy condition. Half of the time they're, pines, which, yes, are native to North Carolina, but they're not really great for the overall, like, canopy for the environmental impact of it. Also, they're shallow roots, and it's prone to falling down during high winds and stuff. And so when they remove trees, like I said, they provide that tree survey, outline the size and the species and the quality, and then in their mitigation chart, we have an approved species list that's reviewed by Keith. And that species list is more higher quality than half of the time of what's being removed. So that's where we then get into, yes, you're removing a potential older, larger tree, but you're planting it back with something that is of higher quality, and that's going to be better in the long run for the village. Getting into finishing up the Chapter 93 stuff, this is just talking about protection of heritage and specimen trees. Hazard and nuisance trees, this is where, once again, like, it's basically giving the village the authority to, if a property owner has a tree that's hazardous and potentially falling, we can cite them. We can also take emergency action if it needs to, especially if it's leaning over a public road. This is the mitigation, replacement and mitigation chart for basically, once again, if you get a tree removal permit or don't, which is right under this, but if you get a tree removal permit, this is basically what your mitigation is. So if you are removing 3 trees that are, you know, one is a 16-inch in diameter, or sorry, one is an 18-inch, and this might need to be moved to 12. It should be 12, not 18. But let's say if you have a 12-inch in diameter tree, a 24-inch, and a 16-inch, you would have to plant back either, you know, one, you have 2 of those canopy trees at 3 inches in caliper, and then for that one that's larger than 18 inches, you would have to plant either 2 at 4-inch or 1 that's older. You do not have to mitigate if it's dead. We do always recommend it, though. And then this also clears out a fee in lieu or off-site planting, because once again, the intent's to plant a tree back. If you don't have a property, if you are doing a pool and you won't want to have that shade cover, you do have an option to pay this fee in lieu, which goes into a tree fund that the village then can plant trees on public property that we would potentially use for planting for trees of Arbor Day and such.
Quick question on this. So, like for someone like, we've got 4 acres, it was like Mike's, ours was completely covered in trees. We removed just a very small amount to place our house, and we still have tons of trees left on our property. We did not even come close to removing what was allowed, you know? So if I wanted to remove a healthy tree because of whatever reason, would this still apply to me, even though I have not removed?
My interpretation would be yes, because if this goes into effect, it's from any removal of tree from here on out, like as in this point in time. That may, though, tie into Article 11, and that's why it's stuff I have to still kind of work through, is that if you have like that tree credit area, that can count and outweigh your mitigation calculation. So,
I mean, almost the majority, I would say 3 out of my 4 acres are all covered in trees and a lot canopy. So, like, I think personally, I would be like, I'm not planting extra trees. I have enough trees on my property to cover it. So, that's just slight, I mean, I know there's a difference between someone removing a tree living in Marvin Creek and someone removing a tree in the Farms of Meadowlark where there are tons and tons of trees. I would just question that part. And if we're talking about, maybe this kind of goes back to that, you know, what we were talking about, not necessarily density, but percentage of, you know, house to the land. I know that gets complicated, but.
yeah, there's a couple ordinances I did look at when it gets into that, what is our Article 11, the landscaping and the development side of it, that does have some language that you're supposed to have X amount of percentage of trees on property at all time type thing. We can look at that. It's, the thing is, and John, you were kind of bringing this up, is it does come down to the staffing that we have and also like the resources we have to pull something to verify a lot of this stuff. But I made a note, I'll have to think about that in regards to, like, yes, if you want to remove 1 or 2 trees from your property, just because.
Yeah, I mean, most of the trees we remove are because they're dead, and I mean, we have to have trees, we have to have removals, people come out every single year because we have so many trees on our property, but they're only because they're dead and they're a hazard to falling, so we've never removed, since the time we built the house, we've never removed trees just for the kicks of it, you know, but.
I still think.
Did you have to pay $1,000 per tree?
Well, that's what I'm trying to, I mean, once again, this is the same
I am
mitigation
helping the tree
table.
canopy, and I'm gonna be penalized at the same time, you know what I mean? So like.
We can, if we want to take out that whole private property thing, it's completely up to you guys on this recommendation.
I think we should.
You think we should?
I mean,
Fine people $1,000 for trees?
no, I think we should, I mean, I think that there should be clear parameters for private property. If somebody just wants to take one tree down, like, we took out 2 healthy trees to build a garage, and then we reused it to build a bar, so it's not like you know. But my point is that, if somebody just wants to take a tree down on their personal property, okay, I mean,
I said,
I just,
I am
don't know,
open,
I feel like that's
the whole
kinda-
reason I wrote this in was based off of kind of the direction I thought I was kind of getting at the last meeting. Because essentially, I can take out 9308, and then basically what we would then regulate is protection of heritage and specimen tree on individual private property.
Or maybe if they want to come in like what Kelly was saying and clear cut their entire backyard, they can't do that. But if they just want to take out a tree or two, I mean,
So where's the number?
Well, I mean,
I don't know what the
but
number
they,
is,
if
but,
they're,
yeah.
maybe that's just more like, those are fines rather than, mitigation.
Well, that's
So-
what I'm saying. What that's saying is you don't necessarily have to plan it back. The goal, I mean, and those numbers are actually just like insert. We would have to actually do it through our fee schedule. So that number would actually change. That's just used for illustration at the current moment or what could be. But essentially what the actual language would say in this instance on this chart is that it would just say, per replacement, tree, in compliance with the, adopted fee schedule. And then we would just adopt the fee schedule each year and we would just do it that way. But what this is basically saying is, yes, if you have a healthy tree on your property, if you were to do it for a bar or an addition, that's a little different because I'm not gonna necessarily, personally, and the way I've done this in the past is, I'm not necessarily gonna require a mitigation for that because you are trying to better the enjoyment use of your property
Right.
or enhance your property.
A healthy tree for firewood.
That, like I said, that's what I'm trying to not have. I'm trying to have if somebody wants to cut down a tree, I'm trying to have them have a plan on what they're doing and then a process to either mitigate or not mitigate. But the goal of this is where you're not cutting down trees on your property just because you want to. And if you do, you have a right to do so, but you may have to.
Pay $1,000.
That's if it's a larger canopy tree. And that's also, like I said, that is just a number that's inserted in this chart.
Tree service.
Oh, my God.
Do we have to vote on this today?
I need chapter 93, yes. But if you don't want the private property in there, what's what's originally drafted in your packets basically does not have the private tree or the private property. This was
Angel,
recommended by.
I tell you, here's the thing. If we take out the private property, there are all of these large tract lots along our major thoroughfares that will eventually be under development, and
But, so
we
maybe.
won't be able to control it.
Well, but maybe what we do is we put in like if you take out X amount, I don't know, maybe it's 5, then you gotta get a permit, or 3, or you gotta get a permit. I mean,
Well-
to avoid clear cutting, maybe there's a number that
I
we
mean,
put.
now, so
are?
Hunter, can you, so here, tell us the difference between, so I don't mind having to get a tree permit, right? Now, replacing something that I have plenty of on my property, I have a different thought about that. But the difference between someone wanting just to randomly cut down some trees in their yard and actually, doing tree removal to put a house up on that property, those are different things
Right.
that are
Yes.
treated
Right.
differently.
Right, right.
So what do you not, like, which one of those, or is it both of them that you don't want in there?
Well, I don't like clear cutting, period, regardless, in development
I
at
agree,
all, and
yeah.
that's a different thing. But my concern is telling somebody, if you cut down a tree, you need to mitigate it, and it's gonna cost you $1,000 if you don't get a permit, because it's private property. I'm concerned about personal property rights.
So we could amend this language briefly where it says replacement planning and schedule, where it says for permitted removals of healthy trees, the property owner is generally required. It could be just, we could add generally required, and upon the zoning administrator's discretion to an extent. Because then you're giving a little flexibility to the staff to make that determination
It's an
if it
administrative
should, if it should be mitigated. Because then, in my opinion, that covers where, once again, if you were trying to cut down 20 trees versus one
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to mitigate. So, I mean, I could add some language right here that just says generally required, and just like, up to the discretion of the planning and zoning administrator, and leave it at that.
Because you're not going to
But if you
be,
put a number on it, all right, I cut down one tree this week, I cut down one tree next week, I cut down one tree another week.
Yeah.
I'm only cutting one down,
yeah,
but over the period, I've cut down 10.
But then you're still leaving,
Cut down 10 trees.
yeah.
but you're leaving it up to the planning and zoning administrator, where if you cut down one, and then you come back and you cut down another, and you come back a third time, I'm probably gonna be like, all right, you're mitigating this one.
So you have to get a permit.
Yeah, but, and we're still saying, keep the permitting in there, but,
I think the permit solves all the problems. Because then you know exactly what they're doing.
I agree with, permitting. My only issue was if I get a permit, you allow me to cut a tree down, then you want me to pay for it. When I've got a million trees on my property, I'm gonna say, nope.
Yeah, that doesn't, if you have a big tree that,
But if it's up to the, if it's an administrative decision, then they can use that judgment to say, yeah, this is not,
Yeah,
you've got a million trees on your property, you don't need to mitigate.
I would be okay with that.
Try to think on how to word this. Either way, I'm gonna highlight this, and we'll add that language where it's basically, it's up to the discretion or upon the findings, but basically, we're tying it back to the tree removal permit, and then, and just leave that up to the interpretation and then as an administrative decision on if it needs to be mitigated. And once again, this is specifically for individual private property.
Which
So-
you would be reasonable, I mean, staff
Yeah,
would be
which,
reasonable on that.
like I
so
said, for the
I'm-
most
I'm
part,
good with
that's
that.
how it's always been done. I mean, even if, like I said, you were cutting down trees for a pool, like, you want sun around your pool. Like, so where they maybe cut down 8, and Keith is always involved in these processes, that maybe we just say, hey, can we at least get maybe 2 or 3 quality canopy planted back along the edge of your property that's not gonna impact your sunlight or anything in the long run? Like, we work with them, and that's how we've always done it. And this is still kind of that intent there with that. It's just, this is just still cleaning up, like, you need a permit type thing.
what if I say, I mean, yeah, what if I think it's dead, but it's not? Are you coming out to inspect that tree?
Yes, well, no, but what this says,
I'm just saying, there's,
what this says is, it says, removal of trees that are dead, diseased, or pose an imminent hazard to the person or property, you can do it without a permit. And it says, to qualify for this exception, the property owner shall provide documentation of the tree's condition and allow for the village to do it. And like, this is how we've been doing it administratively anyway. The current ordinance says you don't have to have a permit. I can count probably 10 in the last month and a half that have reached out to me about removing a dead tree. And I'm like, hey, you don't need a permit, but either provide me email documentation from a tree care company or photos, and I will have Keith, and one of us will inspect, or fill out this tree removal permit, we'll waive the fee, where at least we have it documented. Because like I said, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that if we have the documentation, because if a neighbor calls, I can be like, yes, it is dead, and I have the proper documentation that it was dead. However, if you cut it down and you say it was dead, you have to have, basically, you have to have that information, because then I can come and enforce that saying, well, you don't have documentation that I was dead, so therefore you cut down a tree without the proper permit, and you're in violation of this ordinance.
Normally, when,
I've been listening to this for a long time, and
you can thank Mike for that.
as the person in the room that reads and interprets statutes and laws and regulations for a living, the challenge you have here is that there's too many variables, and it's really hard to write laws that apply equally to your property and my property. My topography may be like this, yours may be, there's hundreds of variables, and I'm a big believer in, we're not the only one that's confronted this issue. So how have others addressed it, given themselves the flexibility to protect trees when it makes sense, but not to, punish people that are, I'm a big believer in personal property rights myself, but, so we're trying to sort of walk that tightrope between protecting trees and preserving individual rights.
Like I said, everything that we're kind of been under discussion is under a section that I kind of added in just based off of the feedback. Now, when I say I added it in, we already have it in in the current existing 93 when it comes to individual property. All this is kind of cleaning up a few things on that. I completely agree with you, and that's kind of the hardest thing when you're writing ordinances, is that you have to think about how this applies to the village as a whole, not just 1, 2, 3, or 4 properties, because there's a lot of times that somebody will want to amend the ordinance because it will directly benefit or help them, but they don't realize, like, when when I have to do the research, it's got to be to make sure that it fits as a whole, because it applies to the village as a whole. My thought is, and we can add language, and it's somewhat already kind of, once again, it comes to whoever's sitting, if it's me or whoever's sitting in my position, and how they interpret the ordinance. Because you could add language in there, for example, in that first one, authority, or where it talks about duties and responsibilities, it says that the village planning and zoning administrator has the duty to enforce the regulations of this chapter. Now, that then can be on them on how strict they want to enforce them or how loose they want to enforce them. You know, but yes, like I don't know if there's a perfect way to, if it's putting a number to it or whatever. Like I said, we can take out this whole private property. I'm hearing kind of mixed things, like some people want a permit, but like I said, I'm in the same boat with this. Trust me, Marvin was the first place I ever worked that had tree removal permits on individual private property. Like, I got a call first time, like, my first week here, hey, I need a tree removal permit. I'm like, for what? Because, you know, in the communities I worked for prior, like, you could clear cut your lot. I mean, and I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying, like, it is different. And
Like, what does Weddington do, or Waxhaw, or Mineral Springs, or, I mean, what do they, I mean, are they all different?
So once again, this kind of then still gets back when it comes to private property of that gray area of if they have local enabling legislation or not. Everything that we're reading, obviously, in like Waxhaw and Weddington, is tied in their development ordinance, just as we already have it in Article 11, and it's tied to development. There's certain communities, what I have found here is what was in Davidson's, and I thought it was just pretty straightforward and clear for individual lots that aren't, and basically what their chapter is, it says for individual lots that are not a part of a development plan, which basically means like your individual lot that's not, you know.
So they don't have anything like this?
For Weddington Wise, like I said, they have language regarding Article 11. I would have to go and look to see if they have specific language about private property. Like I said, we have it existing now. It's just a very, very weird way. Like, I'll pull this up, but like to show you guys for reference.
I'm wondering if it makes sense to go back and kind of revisit what other municipalities do, and, you know, that are kind of local to us, and maybe do something similar, you know? I mean, but like Wesley Chapel, or, you know, somebody more our size.
Hunter, is there a way to,
Well, Weddington's not.
is there a way to approve a portion of this for your grant and then do,
I mean, I can take out the whole private property thing, and everything else is just really regarding public trees. Has nothing to do with your individual property.
but
Can we
could
revisit
we?
it? Maybe,
We can come back to the private
Yeah,
property
can
thing,
we
yes, that's
revisit
fine.
The whole personal property thing?
That's what
like,
I'm saying.
Yeah, can we
Yeah,
revisit
can
that?
we take that out
and
you
still
can
get
Yeah.
your
move forward and
People are not gonna clear cut their lot for no reason. It's expensive, and it makes you,
Well, they're doing it.
no, not for no reason.
Well,
You're gonna spend thousands of dollars to clear cut a lot. Now, I'm not talking about land development,
no, I mean individual lot owners.
just for no reason. They're spending thousands of dollars to remove trees.
Because they don't want the hassle of building around them, or,
I'm talking about existing homes, no construction.
how about if they want a bigger yard, Ken?
right, but what's happening now is people
Okay.
are buying lots, like larger lots. They're knocking the homes down, the old homes down, and then clear cutting the lot to build.
But that's still tied to development.
I'm talking about a permitted those are permitted be able to put a soccer field if I wanted there. If I want to spend thousands of dollars to regrade my lot, and, you know,
I get what you're saying.
how do you, where do you draw that line?
Not by charging them $1,000 a tree.
No.
That's only if it's
Statute
large
needs-
canopy.
Like every statute needs a penalty, an enforcement penalty.
I'm
So,
for that.
this is an attempt, you either fine them, or you punt, or you make them plant new trees, which
Yeah.
is, I'm not gonna put up my land and then.
Plant trees.
Replacement trees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So why don't we do what we just said, is we can approve the
everything but.
the adjustments, take out the private property, and then continue the private property discussion.
That's fine. Like I said, I just want to show you, so this is what's currently in our ordinance, right? It says a tree removal permit will be required if you're removing any canopy tree 12 inches or larger and understory 4 inches, excluding individually owned residential zone lots of record that existed at the time of the adoption of this chapter that are less than 5 acres in area, or any non-subdividable lot. Well, that's what I did. That's what the new, basically, it's taken away that exemption. So I'm just trying to point out, like,
Tree permit will be required.
this is part of the issue, because one, I could argue from a planning standpoint that every lot is technically subdividable, because if you get rezoned to a certain district, not saying it's gonna get approved or not, but I'm just saying, hypothetically, so how do I say what's non-subdividable and not? What is subdividable and not? Now, you could interpret this, yes, if you were in a platted subdivision, like Firethorn, you could be exempt. Because in theory, you have an existing house on, half an acre to an acre of a property, if not larger, and there's no way that that could be even subdivided, even if in any district.
So you're saying,
Like that, that could be, yeah, that is what this is reading now. But like I said, the way that it reads,
that's the crazy part, is that, you build your house 18 years later, the trees grow up, and you're like, I got too many trees. I can't.
no, and all I'm trying to do is basically, Keith recommended that we, one, clarify and clear this up. But this individual tree removal permit is not anything that has to that deal with Tree City USA. So like, we can table that part of 93,
Let's just table it, yeah.
that's fine. So what I've done,
I do think we need to, I do think that we at least need to address and get rid of this, all these lots are exempt if you were platted before X amount of time, because those are the ones that are probably the most important.
we could potentially tie it to a zoning district and maybe say rural, I don't know. I'll have to do a little research on that and maybe play and think about how we want to. But for right now, we're just gonna remove this section from this proposed text. And so everything is then just specifically focused on, I'm gonna leave the protection of heritage and specimen tree.
Yes.
Yeah, so we can still get and so everything else will stay in here, even like this tree replacement and mitigation will still stay in here because it doesn't really impact anything at the time being. Like, obviously, we can still revisit amending this, but I'm trying to get, I'm trying to focus on the public tree portions of this. But I do want to mention, like, part of this would have this tree fund option. This would allow us to have money in a reserve for, planting trees maybe along greenways at parks or part of the Arbor Day celebration, something. That's kind of, once again, the intent is to preserve and maintain and enhance over time.
Wait, can you go back to this highlighted part again?
Yeah, this is,
So they're required to maintain the trees on their property.
I pulled this from certain ordinances that had this. It's kind of, I don't know if it's more of a regulation more than guidelines, if you think about it. And I have it highlighted because this is one section that also might not be in the final version. Like, I'm waiting to hear back from Keith on his input on this.
So you're saying if somebody cuts down a tree, they have to replace it?
Well, like I said, this is still, this is tied to the maintenance of the private property. And so this says, outside of construction or development activity, property owners are responsible for maintaining trees on their property in a safe and healthy condition. It says required landscape and mitigation plantings must be maintained in perpetuity If such trees die or are removed, they must be replaced by the property owner within reasonable time. Once again, if we're gonna kind of change how we're doing the other article, this becomes kind of null and void on that
I would
replacement
remove it.
thing.
I would remove it for now, because the other thing is like, like what Ken was saying, it also, like if a tree dies and we want them to replace it, well, it might not be, there might be conditions there that no tree is gonna be healthy. Do you know what I mean? So like, it just doesn't make sense. It's just a waste of resources and money. So let's
And
table this section.
I
for
will
later as
say,
well.
this portion could also, this specific maintenance thing could potentially be in Article 11, because it's referring to obviously like the buffers, the tree credit area, and as well as like, once again, it's mainly trying to, the intent of here is like, once again, if you have a subdivision, they plant trees on each individual lot. Like Article 11 says you have to have, I think, like 2 or 4 canopy trees on each individual lot. What that's basically doing is saying, you gotta maintain, if those trees were planted as part of a development plan, they need to kind of remain there, or you must always have X amount of trees on your property. We can take it out for now, but we can kind of think through on, is it being added back to the Chapter 93 or to Article 11? With that being said, the last part is just the appeal process. It's the same, it basically just references back to the MDO, so obviously, there is an administrative decision in this. But once again, this is, appeals are, in this, on this version, taking out those certain things would basically be if somebody violated and cut down a tree on public property or something like that, and we cited them for it, and they wanted to appeal that. And then this is just the penalty and enforcements. But that's basically the gist of it. Like I said, all of this stuff is mainly now clarifying the public tree maintenance responsibility, referencing the standards that staff and our contractors are supposed to follow, and yeah, because the 2 recommendations that were from the state was assign authority over responsibility for the care of public trees. This can be done through tree board or a municipal department or both. We did both. And then 2 was provide clear guidance for planting, maintaining, and removing trees from streets, parks, and public land. The NC Forest Service recommends adopting the ANSI A300 tree care standards. So everything that's in this now is covering those 2 recommendations. So what I would recommend, depending on, I know we kind of have been talking trees to death, we just need to make a we might need to amend the motion, but basically just to recommend the text as amended of Chapter 93, because I don't want to include Article 11 amendments in this text amendment at the current moment.
Can somebody update the motion in eScribe? And while they're doing that, somebody get ready to make it.
It's all you, Kelly.
I'll make it.
Your motion should be updated now.
Have a planner's report.
Can refresh.
No, we've been talking about,
We can also read it and say so moved.
pay attention. Wait, what, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I just need to refresh. All right, so I will make the motion to recommend approval of the zoning text amendments to Chapter 93 of the Marvin Code of Ordinances as amended. Do I have all in favor?
Let's do it.
So moved. All right, moving on.
So,
Good luck on your grant.
well, it's not a grant, well, it could open us up potential grant funding. It's just getting the Tree City USA accreditation for the village.
Good luck on your accreditation.
thanks.
Accreditation.
One thing I want to then like hit on, so we're not going to have the December meeting. We don't have any like pending applications, and this is stuff that the text amendments that we've been working on, we can revisit in January. But I do want to hit on like the development side of this. So in old Chapter 93, or what will be the old Chapter 93, there were still regulations that talked about tree mitigation, planting, all this stuff when it comes to development stuff. And so a lot of that's already covered here, but we have cross-referenced and basically added any provisions from the old Chapter 93 into this. But I want to point out, like, with any development, any new development, once again, subdivision or whatever, you have a tree conservation area. This is similar to the old ordinance where we had the interior and exterior tree preservation areas. But this basically outlines, based off the amount of the size of the parcel, how the percentage of the lot area that has to be preserved. Now, I'm not in, what am I trying to say? I'm not opposed to obviously doing some research and looking at these percentages to potentially be larger. As Rick said, like, the MDO, I mean, the goal is obviously go to a section and it be clear, and you don't have to like go from here, 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 and here like you did under the old. When these percentages, and I would have to maybe talk with him and get his pick his brain on this, is like where it says on greater than 10 acres, it says 6% of the lot area has to be located within the required planting yards or within 25 feet of the side and rear property lines, whichever is greater. Now, that ties in, once again, I'm going to use Marvin Commons for an example in this. Because it's a new development, there's a buffer. There was a buffer type B, I believe, so it's that 20 or 30-foot buffer. Once they kind of play off of each other here, because that exterior buffer, this is basically trying to say, like, we want you to preserve those trees, if possible, within that buffer. We can potentially look at trying to add language for like an interior tree. It's kind of hard because once again, you can't pick out, we can talk about one specific development in theory, like talking about how we want to write this, but then how would it play out, once again, in future development. So staff can look into the percentages here. You still have an open space requirement too, so, they play off each other of like, it just all wraps itself into a lovely development ordinance, but,
Is there a way to give benefits to developers who do like what Mike was saying, where like they did Firethorn? So you can go ahead and cut trees down for infrastructure, but if you leave individual lots, if you've got if you're going to do 25 homes, if you leave individual lots wooded, and then deal with them on like a per build basis, that we can, give them some sort of benefit back.
there is, I don't know if, there's numerous ways. I'm going to tell you the one thing that's common, which I don't think really is something that we want to do, is density credits. If you go look
Can
at
you
what
explain
a
you mean
density
in
credit
this-
is.
In this instance?
So density credits, for the most part, and it varies from whatever municipality, but the general concept is that if a developer does a cluster or conservation type subdivision and preserves more trees or exterior, interior, whatever, that their yield of what would be under the base underlying zoning, maybe let's use SFR1, so their yield would be obviously 1 house per acre. The density credit option, it would be like that they maybe were to yield an additional like 25%, and I'm not saying that I'm recommending this, just to be clear for anybody listening and for the board, but like an additional 25% of units than what the base underlying zoning would be. That's one option. And we can pull some language for you just so you can kind of see what I mean by that. You do have this tree credit also already in the ordinance, which talks about basically if you have that mitigation table for what's removing, but what this is trying to do is basically saying if you are preserving trees on the interior that's not in your tree credit area, then it reduces your overall mitigation, if that makes sense. Like,
I guess it would depend on whether or not what they're preserving is actually valuable.
Well, that's-
for instance, with the Zepsa property, they were trying to save a magnolia tree and work their parking lot around this magnolia tree. I love that, you know. That's probably worth it, right? Magnolias grow really big and they're fun to climb, and not that we want them climbing on, you know, private property, but, so what, I mean, like, so in that case, like, they were trying to actually do some tree preservation on the inner lot.
So, yeah, so right now, like, right here, 11.94 talks about treehouse. So it talks about no credit will be allowed for dead trees. Like, you can say, like, you're preserving, but if it's dead and not good quality, we don't have to give you a credit for it. But
What
yes,
about
this is,
size?
huh,
What about
size?
size.
So
Like, if they're saving a crepe myrtle, who cares, you know?
this would in somewhat get into probably the specimen tree preservation within the lot. This is where, once again, go to that definition of specimen tree, but this would allow you to based off the size of the specimen tree, would allow you to reduce your tree credit area. And I would have to dive further into this to like kind of really make sure I'm explaining this correctly. But we do already have provisions in the MDO that kind of provide some of that flexibility. At the end of the day, what we do is, like I said, when we get a site plan or, you know, a construction documents, when they provide that tree survey, they once again mark up all the trees that are being removed. Let me phrase that. All trees over 12 inches in diameter. Because once again, a wooded lot could also be a lot of underbrush and undergrowth that don't technically meet the definition of a canopy tree. And what myself and Keith does is we look at it, because there's, you know, the grading and everything else goes into this, that, you know, they could once again show that they're identifying a tree to be preserved, but Keith will say this: if you're scraping the topsoil around the tree, and even if you have a tree protection fence up, like you're still jeopardizing the longevity and health of that tree in the long term. And so what we do is we try to identify areas or trees that do and that we would recommend being preserved, as well as then once again, we ensure that the quality of the trees being planted back are of high quality and not just cheaper species that aren't either one, not native or defined as invasive to the area, but two, once again, it's a more quality tree. Like, we're not, to your point, we don't want crepe myrtles and evergreen screening. We want hardwood canopy trees to be planted back.
What about for heritage trees?
For heritage trees?
Well, yeah, what is that, what you call them, the heritage tree, like the larger trees that need to be preserved, like the one in Eford Park, that gorgeous, used to have a rope swing on it.
It's still covered. Like I said, if it's, what the ordinance says is that they're supposed to be preserved. If they need to be removed, then they have to mitigate at a higher rate. But we also, it does provide us the option potentially to say no in that, so.
Okay.
So so at the January meeting, we'll come back and we'll kind of have a further conversation on looking at the changes to Article 11, as well as additional kind of updates to that 93 regarding the individual private property. But I do have a draft, and this will, if you guys are interested, I can send this to you just for review prior, but like, is this the right one? I've already kind of taken everything from Chapter 93 and put it into Article 11, but at the same time, it seems like the board would like to kind of look at addressing some additional things regarding when it comes to development related with tree protection as well as mitigation. So I'll put together a chart of like comparison of what was in old Chapter 93 or kind of under the old ordinance and what the new ordinance says, so you guys can kind of see a breakdown of like what we used to do versus now and the difference, and one that could also identify any potential updates, because people are used to, you know, certain standards there, but for the most part, it's still very similar. Maybe terminology's been updated or how we do it. Like, for example, that tree credit area percentage may be different than, or maybe very similar to that interior tree preservation area. And you still have the buffer yards in Article 11 that was similar to the exterior tree preservation area in like subdivisions that most subdivisions have. Because most subdivisions have a 25-foot exterior tree preservation strip. So.
Okay. So no new business. And do you have a planner's report?
No, the only thing is comp plan's underway. And I appreciate all the the ones that volunteered to be on the working group. And we will be rolling out a website for that project in the next few weeks. We'll do a post about it. It'll be in the newsletter. Our consultant actually said it's like the back-end draft of what the website looks like, but the goal of that website is to promote awareness of the comprehensive plan, as well as it's got a public engagement type component of it. So just, everybody be on the lookout for that. And other than that, I think Austin's got a few items, right?
Two things. First, with the new council coming in, we're going to be changing their meeting schedule, and I need you all to change one date of yours to match theirs. Literally what she,
So high maintenance, Angel.
what she said, what they say goes, yeah.
We just need to change one.
I need you all to change
date.
one date on your meeting schedule for next year. The joint meeting is scheduled for February 17th, a Tuesday. I need you all to move that to February 16th, the day before on a Monday. Check your calendars. It has been duel of the calendars for the past few days.
That's President's Day.
Oh, we're open.
Unless you work for a bank, you're open.
I'm gonna switch it right now. 6 o'clock still?
Yes, still 6 o'clock.
Sorry, you said February 16th.
One day earlier, yeah.
Okay. And you'll move it on the calendar?
Yeah, I would just need a motion to amend the schedule. As
Let me let everybody else look at their, let us know, gentlemen, when you guys, if you can confirm whether you can do the 16th. February 16th, so moving Tuesday, February 17th meeting to the 16th. It's Monday. John, you good? If your back is, when are you having surgery? So you
Should've
may,
said February
you may be, okay. So he's a TBD.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
I need a motion to
Okay,
amend
I'll make a motion to amend the calendar,
2026 Planning Board meeting schedule.
2026 Planning Board calendar,
Meeting schedule.
meeting schedule. All in favor?
17th of February.
So moved.
That's enough.
That work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make that change. I'll revise the calendar invites and send you new ones. Second thing, community survey update.
Yes, that was my
Yay.
question.
Community survey update. So I did get an update this afternoon from Central Carolina. We have 478 responses. We're up to 23%. We have shot past the last survey. The last survey was 320, 330. So we're a couple percentage points higher. I've been seeing a lot of growth from a lot of subdivisions. There's still some that have less than 10 responses. I will read those aloud now. Those subdivisions with less than 10 responses are Belgrove, Broadmoor, Cottages at Marvin Gardens, Estates at Marvin Branch, Heritage Oaks, but you guys don't have 10 people. You don't have 10 people. Oakbrook, Providence Ridge, Robinwood, Therrell Farms, Tullamore, Willow Creek, Woodland Forest, and Windmore. And if you did not hear your subdivision, you have none. You've had no responses. We've had a lot of subdivisions have done very well. Weddington Chase is over 60. Marvin Creek is over 60. Firethorn is 45. Canterfield Creek is up to 30 responses. So the largest subdivisions are participating at high rates.
What's Providence Estates and Valhalla?
Providence Estates is up to 18.
Okay,
So that's 4 more since the last time.
and what about Valhalla?
Valhalla is up to 11.
Okay.
Okay, now I need to know my neighborhood.
Meadowlark is, see, you guys confuse me because half of y'all put Meadowlark and half of y'all put farms at Meadowlark.
It is technically the farms at Meadowlark.
Your HOA president said differently. He said it's just Meadowlark.
No, it's the farms at Meadowlark.
So you, 5 for the farms at Meadowlark and 6 for Meadowlark. So you guys have 11 total.
So we got, sorry?
11.
That's
11.
good, they only have 19.
We only have 18 residents.
That's pretty good. Some of the smaller subdivisions are still participating at good rates. I've just been pestering the ones with less than 10 responses. There's a few on here that should have more for how many homes they have.
Yeah.
It's the newer subdivisions are suffering the most. The Heritage at Marvin, I don't have a single response from. I've been having their developer blast it out, no one's doing it. Broadmoor's only 9, they have, what?
Do you guys still have the yard signs?
We have the yard signs, we put some along, at least put some at Marvinford Park and some for the trails. We're not really putting them like,
I'd put them in the entrances of the neighborhoods that have low.
we just didn't have enough. We can try to relocate those, but we have about 10 days left in the survey.
Oh, okay.
So just letting you know, I will try to reach out to some of these subdivisions one more time.
Survey open?
2 months, 2 full months. Normally, you only do about 6 weeks for the average survey, so we went a little longer.
We need 25-ish to get to 500.
I need 22.
22.
Mm-hmm.
Angel's on it.
She's
I
gonna,
wanted 1,000, dag nabbit. But 500's good. Yeah, I should have, but, yeah.
You should have had everyone who voted had to fill out the survey.
You know
Before
that,
they left the
yeah,
polling
yeah,
places.
we
I don't think
should have
that's legal,
thought about that,
unfortunately.
yeah.
Good idea, though.
But that's where we are right now. Very good response rate. Central line is impressed, so we're good. The results, we were going to present them in January. With the council reorganizing the schedule, it's probably going to be their February regular meeting now. So Central line will have enough time to come back from the holidays and finish the report and presentation. So that tentative date, as long as everyone is good with it, like if the council's good with it, would be presented on February 2nd. That's Monday, February 2nd. That'd be the council regular meeting for February.
And will it get presented to us? Will we get the report for the planning board or?
They'll do a presentation at the meeting. It'll be posted online afterwards. I wasn't planning on making it a standalone agenda item.
I mean, are we just going to personally get the report? Like, are we going to see the?
Are you going to put it on the website?
Yes,
maybe?
it's going to be
Yeah,
published.
yeah.
It's going to go, it'll go in the minutes for that meeting, and it'll be published on the website, and there'll be
I wanna look at the
communications
data.
going out about it.
You and me both.
Austin, I hate to throw a rock in everything, but any idea that percentage response previously versus now, because we've gained
We have grown.
residents?
Last time, I think, was a 19% response rate, so we're a few points up. That's good. We've added a couple hundred homes since the last survey. We still have a larger response rate than we did at the last survey.
Okay.
That's what's the most important thing.
All right.
We'll
Thank you
do
for that.
one last push.
Anything else, Austin?
No.
Okay. We don't have any action items, so let's go around the room. Bob, do you want to start us off?
Don't have anything. Congratulations to Angel. And I guess we're going to need to, at some point in the future here, replace Angel and get a new board member?
Yes.
Yes.
Angel will be required to step down from this board if she wants to be on council.
Bye.
Nice.
And I will need,
Don't let
I
the door
will-
hit you on the way out.
I will need that in writing. Yes, we will have two, we already have 2 applicants who have put applications in the past month or 2 because they anticipated a vacancy.
Wait,
Yes, so we already have 2 applicants. Once there's officially a vacancy, they'll be notified, and those applications will be sent to the council for consideration. We'll probably do another advertising campaign just to see if we get anyone else. The council is also advertising right now for people to apply for the vacant council seat.
I am not
I-
filling an
I-
application.
I was instructed to draft y'all.
Yes.
You guys have the most experience out of a lot of people in Marvin when it comes to local governance. We do encourage you all to consider applying. Hi, Kelly. It's
Don't
a
look at
2-year
me.
term. It's a 2-year term with the option to run.
Not it. I'm like, no. I already have one budget I have to deal with, so, all right. Okay, so, John, sorry. Ken? I'm good. All right, thank you, staff, and we're going to miss Pelamy. I know we already said it last time, but I'm just going to re-say it, so.
Same thing,
Pleasure to get to see you one more time.
Angel.
And congratulations, yes.
And I think it's important we thank the council, previous council for their service, and especially the mayor who served 12 years. And the town was very different 12 years ago when he started as mayor, and a lot of things happened during those 12 years. So to Mayor Polino, the village owes you a debt of gratitude, so thank you.
Angel?
Well, it's been an honor to serve with you guys, for real. So I've learned a lot. So thanks for having me, and I'll see you on the other side, I guess. Please
We
apply.
will expect you to
Yeah,
we'll
see you in
expect you to
February.
uphold.
Yes.
Uphold. Excellent. All right. Staff, anything, last things from you guys before we let Mike call adjourning? Yeah.
I'm good.
Move to adjourn.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're out. Oh, and next time, eScribe, new eScribe
Yes.
for the next meeting.
Stay here, don't move, we're going to do a quick 5-minute demo of eScribe, of the new version of eScribe. Okay.
I think the tree preservation took up our 5 minutes.
It did not, that's not how this works. All right, so hold on, let's turn off the live streams.
Are we still recording, or are we still?
We are recording in